TNKR Media. Welcome to Inspiring Entrepreneurs Montreal, our 15th season showcasing stories from outstanding business people presented by BDO Canada. My name is Sandrine Rastello, standing in for Dan Delmar, along with Mike Newton of BDO Canada. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Sandrine, how are you?
I'm good, excited to be here. This week on the show, we'll be talking with Jean Bédard, President and CEO of restaurant-turned-food business Groupe Grandio. Groupe Grandio says it's a creator of good times, and it's easy to see why. It owns more than 50 restaurants and franchises, including La Cage and Gibby's. But it also revived the iconic Montreal steakhouse Moishes, and more recently it came to the rescue of microbrewer Brasseurs du Monde. So I'm wondering, what will it save or revive next?
I don't know, but I don't think we're going to have enough time on this show because by the time I get through all my questions and all the points, this man has a very colorful history, and I think there's a lot of things for us to get into. So really looking forward to having him on air with us.
So do I, and also to discuss, the food and the restaurant and the relationship between the two businesses. So I really look forward to that. Later on the show, we'll talk with Jean-François Audet, partner of financial advisory services at BDO Canada, to discuss franchising. But first, let's talk about current events issues. And I think the first story you selected today is from Forbes about leadership. But what's interesting about it, you chose a story from way back when, 2020, my God, it feels like 2 decades ago, but it was a very interesting one. At the time, Forbes was looking at a book by Jacob Morgan called The Future Leader, and he had interviewed CEOs to determine the top 4 mindsets and the top 5 skills that future leaders must master. Tell me, Mike, how do you think this article withstood the test of time?
I think what we've seen is, the pandemic acted as an accelerator moving forward a lot of things that we thought would be 5 years out. So it may have been actually very, very opportune when this article was written. So I think it does really apply. And I think if you look at the first 4 characteristics, as you mentioned, one of them is being a global citizen. I mean, we are still living in an environment where the global economy has a massive effect on everything we do. It's very interesting. I think COVID did bring an interesting perspective on global. I think it brought a little more emphasis on trying to do a little bit more from home and sourcing from home. I think it also brought a very different perspective on the environment and where and how we source. So I still think the global citizen component is extremely vital, but it has probably changed dramatically in the last 3 years in terms of the way we interpret what that global citizen is and who that global citizen is going to be. I find very interesting the second topic is the servant. So the servant mindset, it really goes against what most of us, that have led for years feel like. You're at the top. The servant mindset really now is about practicing humility, emotional intelligence, serving your leaders, your customers, your team. It's a whole different perspective than kind of sitting at a lonely top of a glass house at some point. So it's a different perspective.
I also find interesting, just to go back a minute to the global citizen aspect, I think we've seen during the pandemic also a bigger embrace of diversity, from the ESG point of view, right? Like not only where employees are based, but also the diverse, to have a more diverse workforce, in this sense of being more mindful in the hiring process.
Yeah, I think the whole COVID pandemic and the remote work has really raised people's awareness of traveling, getting to and from work, A lot more people, I think, are consciously taking the train where it's possible as opposed to flying. And I think this whole exercise of remote work allows for people who want to be and leave a much smaller footprint on the world that opportunity to work from home without having to sit in traffic all day. So I think it has had a very, very interesting perspective on the ESG. And I think that the awareness, needless to say, the younger generations get it much better than the older generations, but they are the future, so they're the ones that really need to get it going forward.
I like also the notion of one of these mindsets being a chef, balancing the ingredients. How is that looking today?
Yeah, most definitely. I think we have gone through an extremely difficult period from a labor perspective between labor shortage and the remote work itself and what that means to people in the office. The massive, massive implication of technology, even though it was there before, now everybody's pretty much on the same page in an organization where whether you're working from home or whether you're in the office. I think before the pandemic, it was very spotty to work from home for a lot of people. Now that technology is fluid, and there is no doubt that leading an organization in the coming years is going to be about balancing what is likely the two biggest issues right now, which is humanity issues, people issues, and technology.
And so no wonder that the fourth mindset was being the explorer, embracing the unknown. I think that's what everybody who's still standing today had to do.
Yeah, I think from a successful entrepreneurial perspective, I'm not sure that one's really changed all that much. I think that explorer mentality of trying to find blue ocean out of red ocean, which was a book from years ago of trying to find a space where nobody else is and trying to explore new territories has always been the entrepreneurial mindset. So I think what is happening now from the explorer is the depth and the breadth of hiring people. You cannot just look in your local environment anymore. You have to start exploring different ways to do things. But I think most successful entrepreneurs have really carried that explorer hat or worn that explorer hat very well, and even before the pandemic.
What did you think of the skills they had identified as, the 5 top skills? Personally, I really like the translator, maybe because it has to do with what I do for a living, but really to master communication in uncertain times, to make sure you really communicate clearly with your teams, the goals, but also, for the overall morale and motivation.
Yeah, the 5 topics, and I'll run through them quickly. Just coaching, futurist, technology, a translator, and Yoda. So I would say that I would take translator and Yoda, and the very first one as coach. And these are massive areas. They all involve communication. They all involve um, disseminating information, whether that is structure, whether that is teaching and coaching. The one thing that remote work is been a problem with, and it's in a lot in the professional offices like ours, is it's very hard to coach and mentor at a distance. That ability to kind of learn through osmosis, that ability to watch people in action and learn, and whether that is translating body language, which for a lot of it is an issue that gets lost on screen. So I think these areas are going to continue to be, and let's be honest, until such time as Sandra, and AI replaces you and I, there is going to be a need for coaching and mentoring and translating so that we are all on the same page and trying to move the next generation forward with the same vigor and the same knowledge base that we've all benefited from for many years.
Yeah, and maybe that's just the moment to introduce the fourth story you had selected, but it might be a good time, from Inc.com, about the importance of self-awareness in life and work, because I think it's directly linked to what you were just saying.
Self-awareness is probably been one of the most complicated and difficult things over the years. As you know, before we joined BDO, I was managing partner for 19 years, and I would tell you that my biggest most difficult task was the emotional intelligence component, but especially self-awareness. I think a lot of people do not recognize the influence that they have when they walk into a room, good or bad. Whether that's a body language issue, whether that is the tone with which they speak, whether that is being a completely different person when they're stressed out and forgetting the fact that there's people around them. And people need to spend more time understanding the implications they have. And it's not a narcissistic discussion of saying, hey, how do I affect other people? It really is more important from the other side's perspective, because you're not getting a message across if you are not purporting the right either body language or tone, and you need to understand your effect on other people. I go back to the coaching and the mentoring we talked about a few minutes ago. That inability, you can say what you want, but I believe more what you're showing me than what you're saying to me. Anybody can say anything, but if your body language is saying something different than what your mouth is saying, I got a hard time trying to reconcile those two. And I think people need to understand the implication of, when they walk into a room or they pick up a Teams call or they're on the phone, what is that implication? What are you trying to portray? And is it in congruence with what you're actually showing?
And there are lots of tests out there to sort of understand better how you are in the workplace. I remember when I first did that as an employee, suddenly I understood why I had problems with one of my colleagues. She was a blue and I was a yellow. And suddenly I feel it really improved our work relationship.
100%. I think, we rely a little too often sometimes on tests to categorize people. I think they're a great tool to understand yourself. I think they're a great tool to understand the people around you. And even if it's nothing more than changing the dialogue or opening a different dialogue, then there's an opportunity to learn from them. And whether they're the, Myers-Briggs or some of the strengths finders or the DISCs, I mean, these are great tools that, you can't say, oh, well, now I understand why everything went wrong because, I'm an I and that person's a D and, that's where it goes. But I think if you use it in your arsenal, it goes a long way in helping people understand how to interact. And there's no doubt, I think the higher up you get in an organization and the more you're trying to get a message across, the more you've got to recognize your audience. And it's very hard to recognize and understand your audience if you don't understand yourself.
I know we all have very little time left, but speaking of Arsenal, Shopify had a list of how to build a brand from scratch, really. What did you like about that story?
It's very interesting because I think it ties in nicely with our guests in terms of branding, in terms of, moving forward with an old brand and rekindling Moishes, for example. I mean, here's an iconic Montreal name that for 3 years, people thought they were never going to see again. Now you're bringing it back. So when I look at things from a branding perspective, and I am by no means a brand expert, but I do think that a lot of the steps go into who are you targeting to sell to, and that whether that's a restaurant or that's a professional services firm, you need to know your audience, right? We made that statement in self-awareness. Once again, it pops up. How do you target your audience? Pick your focus and the personality. Okay, what is it, the message you want to give? What is it? And I could take this, André, and say this is my discussion on self-awareness as well. Is what is the focus and the personality you want to give? What is that message? What's your business name? What's your slogan? Choosing to look for the brand, colors and font. I mean, we've heard horror stories in the past about branding and not taking into account different international customs that to find out that you've named something that's offensive in a different language. I think there's so many things that go into branding. It takes us like a reputation, right? It takes us 20 years to build and about 5 minutes to lose it. So I think a lot of energy needs to go into branding, and I'm really curious to talk to Jean, see what this looks like in terms of bringing back some of the iconic brands in Montreal.
So do I. Thanks, Mike. Our guest is Jean Bédard, President and CEO, Groupe Grandio, which owns well-known restaurants and franchises such as La Cage, Gibby's, an iconic Montreal steakhouse, Moishes. Jean, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We will talk about your background, how to run successful restaurants in this economic environment, and the Moishes reopening, among other things. But first, let me kick it off with the first question. You've been in the restaurant business for a long time, and Quebecers are very familiar with some of the restaurant names in Groupe Grandio, such as La Cage or Gibby's. But Groupe Grandio was created only recently. So tell us a bit how it came to be.
Well, what happened during the COVID is that all my colleagues from the industry, we came together very often because we had the same issues, try to open our restaurant again. So I found out that after COVID, it will be tough alone to survive in the restaurant business. So I started discussion, basically during pandemic with a group in Quebec, Resto Plaisir, which owns all Cochon d'Inde and other brands. And also, we have started discussions before COVID with Bistrot chez Lionel, a brasserie française. So it became evident after COVID that we should join our strength together to be able to start back our restaurants and build a new Quebec-based company because I was afraid that we lose a lot of our good brands here in Quebec. And our mission basically is to grow brand and grow people. That's why we name it Grandio. So that was the idea. We worked very hard during COVID. There was some things that we can't control, like the epidemic, but we went closer together as a group. And the example of the opening of Moishes is probably the best example because we bring all the resources of the group together because it's very tough to open a restaurant right now. Everything is more complicated. The costs are going up like crazy. So that's basically the idea that came from Grandio.
So we're going to take a little walk down memory lane, if you'll permit me, because I am always fascinated at what brings an entrepreneur to the stage of life that they're at. So if I do a little bit of Googling, you got to love the internet. You're a CPA by training, right? Yeah. Which, in and of itself, when I run through the next few things that you did in the past, I got a good laugh out of that one. You were Interbox and you were managing boxers like champion Lucien Butte. How long did you do Interbox for?
We were involved from 2006 to 2014, so almost 8 years. It was an accident because I was not born to be a promoter of boxing.
So now I'm even more curious. Why was it an accident? What happened?
Well, what happened is that basically I was advising Eric Lucas. We were sponsoring Eric Lucas at that time, and he started that. The Interbox at that time had issues with finance in 2004, something like that, and it was the year that they had the strike in the NHL. So I said, well, we're dependent of sports. Why are we not creating some content? So that's where we started. It was very small at the beginning because we were doing some small shows, but with Lucien Buteau that was with the company got a lot of potential. But we brought him as a champion, and he started to be very popular. So now we came and had some deals with HBO, with Showtime. We filled the Bell Center for the Butte Pascal fight. Yeah. So it was by accident, but it was a fun period. But now I'm not in boxing anymore. I like sport. I'm a sports fans at the beginning, so it was fun for me to be very in the center of these big events.
I was at the Butte Pascal fight, so that's why it caught my interest. So
it was not a good memory for me, no. But it was full. Yeah, it was not a good fight.
Well, so from a promoter perspective, it was good because it was full, but I guess that was where it ended, right? It's fascinating. You ran a hockey school for years with grads like Chris Letang, who played with the Penguins, Maxime Talbot, who played with Pittsburgh, Philly, Colorado, and the Bruins. What drove that one? Your little history of playing hockey yourself, I assume.
Yeah, I was born and raised in a family that was we love sports. I love the hockey. My kids played a lot of hockey. And they approached me in 2005 or 2006 to become the president of the midget AAA hockey team in Saint-Hyacinthe, which is my where I live. And I started to be involved in that. And I just ended up this year because we made we present the what used to be the Air Canada Cup, and now it was the TELUS Cup, the best midget tournament. It was in Saint-Hyacinthe. I was the president. And it was a very big success. 2 Quebec teams on the final for the first time. My team lost against Quebec, but it was the end for me of this adventure. But that's my way to be involved in the community. I like to be present with some volunteers and doing these events. So that was normal for me. But now I'm traveling more. I'm not there. I don't know the players anymore. So I stopped, but it was a very good experience for me.
And that was really all pretty much a sideline because you started back with the Cage with George Durst back in 1995, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, I was there
as president, I guess, at that point.
No, it was in 1980. I became franchisee with a group in Saint-Hyacinthe in 1989. We opened our first restaurants in May 1989. We opened a second one in 1992 in Boucherville, and that's where Mr. Durst asked me to work with him a little bit because the company was growing. He needs some support, and I have a background as a CPA, as you told people. So I went to help him, and then he told me that he was ready to sell the company to me and my group. So I formed a group, and we bought the control of the company in 1995. So at 30 years old, I became president of Sports Scene. So that was for a 30-year-old guys. You have to remember 1995 is the year that the Expos they had the strike at baseball. We were going to the playoffs, and then they had a NHL strike in January, and Quebec Nordic left in April. So everything during the first year of my presidency was very kind of challenging for sports, but it was a great experience, and I think that we made the things that we need to make, and we're still there 40 years. We will celebrate 40 years of La Cage next year.
That's excellent. I mean, you certainly, if you can survive that period as a sports bar owner, you can survive through just about everything. So you sat on both sides of the fence from the franchising perspective, right? You were a franchisee from the beginning, and then you moved over to be the franchisor going forward. What are some of the issues that you approached? What are some of the problems that you faced, either side of the equation?
Yeah, well, I think my philosophy is that the franchisor has to put on side the best climate for the franchisee to be successful. You have to let your operators operate. So they have to have all the time to put their efforts in greeting their customers and their staff, So, and when I came in 1995, there was a lot of fights between the franchisee and the franchisor, and people need to understand we're on the same team. We're not. So that's my philosophy that I'm trying to keep even going forward. I always said to my team at the office, we're not an accounting office. We're not a lawyer office. We're in the restaurant business, and you need to help these guys to success. That's my philosophy.
And Jean, you're not afraid of challenges, obviously, since from the very beginning and the Expo strike. I was just wondering, because you mentioned earlier that when you opened Moishes, it was in a very difficult new environment. Of course, we hear a lot about inflation, restaurants closing. What have you done to make sure you can survive and actually thrive in this environment?
Well, you have to have good people. And for us, like the Moishes story, we just bought Moishes just before the pandemic. Our plan was to move the restaurant. We were supposed to do it in 2020. And then we were not sure to open it because with what happened downtown Montreal, the costs went up to go up. But we said, I think we have a strong group, and it's a very nice location and it's important for Montreal to have these kind of brands, because for me, it's not competitors. It's the restaurant industry has to be together. So we decided to go through, and I hired great people that are as motivated as I was when I was 30, a lot of energy, and that's why we decided to go. And I think it's a good decision. We're very happy about the results.
Our guest is Jean Bédard, President and CEO of Groupe Grandio. After talking about his fascinating background, we got more into his past business endeavors. And now we want to talk, I think, Mike, you had a question on privatization.
Yeah, it's unfortunate this show is not like 2 hours long, because there's a lot of things, Mr. Bédard, I'd love to go into depth with on you. But the first one that after our break, this first one really revolves around the privatization of the Cage back in November 2021. And maybe just explain to our listeners some of the mechanics to do so, as well as the impetus to do so. I mean, we're coming out of COVID. The restaurant business is suffering still. People are, not sure whether they're going back or not going back in Montreal. And, you're going out to raise $51 million to buy back 7 million shares to take the Cage private.
First of all, when I became president, it was a public company. But at the beginning, it was not in terms of all the details that we have to put public. It was not very complicated. And then it became, I would say, in the last 10 years, very a lot of work to do. Every 3 months, you have to publish your financial statement. and a lot of things that you have to put via everything you're doing. So I had a lot of time to think during COVID, and I said, what will be my next 5 or 10 years? I'm almost 60. Do I still want to run a public company? Which for us, we were not keeping the advantage of being public company, so we were not raising money or trying to do. But we have all the downside regarding red tapes, but also I have to put all my strategy on paper for everybody. So I said, I think it's a good timing. I believe in the strength of the company and the brand, and everything will come back. And there were some kind of people that were interested in helping me do that. And now what's good for the company, and that's why we're maybe in position of be more active, because of the time that we were spending on that we're not spending on right now. We have more time for growth, for strategy, and for things. So I'm very happy. It was a good timing because the people that helped me to do that, they make risk because we did it during we were closed. The good news is that we came back strong. And now I have a lot of fun of running a private company. I can tell you, everybody knows me and knows how I'm happy right now, because I'm not stuck with all these stuff that we have to take care. So basically, that was the point. So I want to change the environment around that.
Yeah, I think most people don't recognize the massive weight of being a public company. The quarterly filings, the reportings to AMF, the reportings to TSX. Everything is going to find its way. That's going on needs to find its way out into the public. And if you're not using the mechanism, like you said, you weren't raising money. No. The stock was relatively illiquid. What's the purpose at the end of the day? So I think it was probably a great move. So that will lead me into my next question, which really is a discussion of branding. When you came out of this privatization process, did you change anything in the way you were doing from a branding perspective?
Regarding the after the privatization? Yeah, well, what we did is that I think we have to make a reflection of all our brands. I think we have too much brand right now in the group. And I believe right now that you have to be very focused on the brands that you think that will bring you to the future. So we have to make a reflection right now of positioning the brands that are not competing together. And that's an exercise that I'm very comfortable to do. I love branding. I love positioning, clear positioning, not complicated, because the restaurant business is a people business. Sometimes there's young people, so don't make it complicated. So let's say for Lacage, it's food, beer, and sports, and you have to be very coherent. So for Moishes, it's more Montreal, sophisticated. So I like to do this exercise. It will be good, easier to communicate to the customers and your staff. And also, it will be coherent with all your brands. So yes, I'm working on that right now, and I love it,
Now, I was just wondering, the relationship between those brands and then the food and what you sell, in supermarket and elsewhere, and what you serve in restaurant. How is that evolving?
Well, what we're trying to do is try to have brands that I said got legs, got potential, and you try to maximize the potential of every brand. So there's some brand that it's easy to put on retail. Some aren't, because they're in a segment that on the retail store the retailers don't have appetite for these kind of products. So we're trying to do a strategy with every brand, and some will be very strong on retail, some it's impossible, but we're trying to find the ways to maximize the presence of these brands, not also in the restaurant, but also on the retail. So, like I said, we're not in the restaurant business anymore. We're in the food business right now, which maybe 25% of our revenue are coming outside our restaurants, and it's growing. This segment is growing, and it gives us presence to our products in other ways for the customers.
So it's an interesting statement that you're no longer the restaurant business, right? You're in the food business. And what does that change from the way you look at the businesses and the way you look at the way you position them and brand them? I mean, people are going to say, well, food and restaurants, it's the same business.
Choice that we're making on our menu has to be coherent to our strategy on retail. So it's not independent. It's a brand that's got some stream of revenue. There's some brand that could be very good on delivery. There's some brand that could be good on takeout. So you take the brand, you see the potential in every stream of revenue and try to maximize it. And it's not the same for every brand. So some brands won't go to the retails because they don't serve the product. But we have a small restaurant, Asian restaurant. Asian restaurants got a good potential on retail. So maybe we'll have not that much restaurants build, but maybe we can be very strong on retail. So every brand's got its own strategy, and we're trying to get the best potential of every of these brands.
We'll let you plug. What's the Asian restaurant?
It's Iru Izakaya. It's a Japanese izakaya in the new area in Brasseurs Solar, and it's fun. It's growing. Japanese restaurant is growing strong. So we're working on some project already. We have only one location. We'll open another one in Quebec City beginning of 2024. And we already working on products to bring to the retail side of the business.
So you open the doors June 14th to Moishes. What's been the biggest challenge?
Put a new team on it's a people business to have the good people to open a restaurant, because as you know, there were already a lot of good talents that left the industry in the past 3 years because of COVID. And when it's a new restaurant, people sometimes they wait until they watch and see. The good news is that Moishes is a brand that everybody knows. So it was maybe a little bit, we were surprised a little bit because people were, we had, when we decided to hire people, there was a lot of people. So it's to have a good team, and we're still working every day to build a team, train them. 3 years, and we have the story about what will be the sales mix in this new location. We started lunch. The other place there was no lunch, so we have to adjust the menu. So it's a very day-to-day adjustment operation, but we're building something, and I think that people will be proud of Moishes. They're already proud, but it will be better and better, and we'll improve in the next let's say 6 months. Yeah.
And you also went to another Montreal institution to hire a chef from Damas, right?
Yes, that's right. And it was the key. The key is, and what is tricky a little bit is try to keep the DNA of the restaurant. People, the old customer that are used to what they were used to have, and bring some new stuff, because customers are changing, the way the people eat are changing. So I think that our chef Martez bring us this balance between the old traditional steakhouse of Moishes and bring some new products on the menu. So because our goal is the Moishes is 85 years old, we want to have Moishes for the next 85. That's the challenge, and that's what we're trying always to balance, to be able to get new customers also.
Thank you, Jean. I think we could have continued talking about this for a very long time, and now we're definitely all hungry. We'll hear your one piece of advice for inspiring entrepreneurs in just a moment. But first, let's check in with our BDO expert guest. Today is Jean-François Audet, partner, financial advisory services at BDO Canada. Thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, Sandrine. Super excited to be with you.
So you have some advice for us today on things to know if you consider acquiring a franchise. Maybe you can start by telling us, why would someone want to buy a franchise instead of a more classic business?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I guess the value of buying a franchise, it really lies mostly in the brand. So you can imagine if you're starting from scratch with your business model, I mean, you need to build your brand, and that can be very time consuming. That's a lot of resources, whether it's time, whether it's money. So when you're buying into a franchise, I mean, this is already established. So that's one big burden that you don't have to worry about. So this is well established. And that goes into also the the support that you're getting from the franchisor. So you can think about these, restaurant franchise where everything is already set up from the kitchen to the cash to the dining room. It's already set up. So you don't have to worry about these things. And I mean, there's also a financial risk that you're going to be, sharing with the franchisor. So, I mean, when you add up all these things, I mean, that could be a very good decision to go for a franchise, as opposed to go for, regular business where you would assume all the risk and you would be pretty much on your own.
So it's interesting because the franchise perspective, Jean-François, is something that's been around, to certainly for many, many years. There's varying degrees, I guess, of franchise involvement. The McDonald's concept of where everything is exactly the same in every shop, to some that are a little easier to work with. But if I'm looking out to go buy a franchise, what are some of the things that I should be looking at? I mean, you mentioned, like you said, the locations have been picked, the recipes have been decided, but you're getting a turnkey operation, but it doesn't always mean it's the right thing for you. And you got to do your own due dil, even though you can't necessarily change the terms and the conditions. You still need to do dil to make sure it's good for you.
Absolutely, Mike. And this is critical, when you do your diligence before you put your money into this venture. Obviously, the first question that you need to ask yourself is, am I getting into a new market, or is it an established market where, I'm just buying from the prior franchisee for whatever reason, right? So do I have an established market? Do I have to develop that market? That really changes the perspective and the risk that you're assuming as, a franchisee. So to me,
and I assume that's reflected in the price.
Well, I mean, it has to be. So that goes further down the road into the diligence that you're doing, because if you have to assume all that risk, I mean, you want to also look at the demographic, like the market that you're getting into. What's your crowd in that area, and how does that tie to the product or the service that you're selling, right? I mean, there must be some commonalities between what you're offering and the demographic that you're about to serve, right? So and again, I mean, if it's not overlapping, obviously that should be reflected in the price, right? I mean, you wouldn't pay the same price if you're getting into a new market where you still have to make your proof and to see some real numbers, actual numbers showing whether it's profitable or not, because you would be relying solely on studies and things that are not concrete yet, right? So but if you're getting into something that is well established, I mean, you would still look at the cash flow, the typical type of how recurring and how steady that revenue stream is. But again, like whether it's a new market or an existing market, that really changes the perspective from a franchisee standpoint of view.
I mean, the upfront fees can be very sizable in a lot of franchises. If you look at
Yep.
Tim Hortons, or you look at McDonald's,
Yep.
And I guess, like you're saying, the risk associated with all of that is less than it would be to try and start something on your own. But I mean, we're not talking $20,000 or $30,000 here. You're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, $1 million. Where does the money come from?
That could come from many different places, Mike. I mean, you would see very often franchisees that would put some of their money into this venture because they firmly believe into it. I mean, otherwise, you would go to banks and to sell the business case, right? So that would be the typical, well, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm supported by, this franchisor. The brand is known. Here are the projections. I mean, we're predicting to do X, Y, Z in terms of profit in the future. What can you offer? So, I mean, you would see also the typical, financing from traditional lenders, which, I mean, when you have a strong brand to back an operation, let's be honest. I mean, that makes a big difference too, right? As opposed if, you were to go on your own, nobody knows you, nobody knows the product, would be a bit more difficult in my opinion, to get into to obtain financing.
Have you seen franchisor financing?
I mean, it's something that does exist. I mean, it's kind of reflected into the structure, the arrangement that you have between the franchisee and the franchisor. I mean, obviously, you're paying royalties to the franchisor, to use the infrastructure, to benefit from the know-how. and everything else. So that's some sort of financing, to use the brand.
I guess the one thing that I would add on to the end of the story is, if you are going to go out and look to buy a franchise, that as a franchisee, make sure you bring your own support system. Make sure you bring your own professionals, whether that's the accountants, the lawyers, whoever it is. You can't just take the franchise agreement at face value. You need to have the right people behind you, like any other entrepreneur would.
That is paramount, Mike. You want to be surrounded by, seasoned professionals that know what they're doing, what they're talking about. It's definitely worth the investment. I mean, you're buying a peace of mind, in my opinion, when you're dealing with these professionals, as opposed to, save a couple bucks and then have to deal with the struggles down the road.
Yeah, you don't always want to be the smartest person in the room.
Sometimes it's good to listen to the people around you that, that have your back.
Well, lots of good advice here to keep in mind. Thank you, Jean-François, for joining us. And don't forget, you can read more thought leadership and expert advice from the BDO team at bdo.ca. And as we come to the end of the show, let's ask our entrepreneur, Jean Bédard, President and CEO Groupe Grandio, for his one piece of advice for inspiring entrepreneurs.
Well, I would say that entrepreneurs, usually they have a lot of projects. So when you go to a project, be sure that you have the good people to bring this project to success. That's what I learned, because sometimes we have great ideas, but we don't have people to do it. So that's very important, to be circled with very good talent to bring this project at the end.
Thank you very much, Jean Bédard from Groupe Grandio, for joining us this week on Inspiring Entrepreneurs. Mike, any final thought?
It's a fascinating show, Mr. Bédard. I think brings the true spirit of entrepreneurship and certainly Quebec entrepreneurship. So hats off to all the great things you're doing, bringing back the iconic brands, and gotta love the history of a little bit of boxing and a little bit of hockey to throw into all of that. So thank you so much for your time, and it was a
pleasure.
It was a great show. Thank you.
Next week on Inspiring Entrepreneurs by BDO Canada, our guest is Adèle Tarzibachi. She's the co-founder of Les Filles Fatouches, a catering company that gives Syrian women a job that puts their culinary talent to use as they arrive in Canada. A reminder that you can subscribe to Inspiring Entrepreneurs Montreal as a podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple, or your favorite platform. And you can also log on to the website, inspiringentrepreneursmtl.com, for hundreds of local entrepreneur profiles. Thanks, Mike. See you next week.
This has been a production of TNKR Media. Good talk.